Call 911 now. Daniel Brooks didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for anyone to move. He pushed through the frozen crowd of executives in their $1,000 suits, dropped to his knees, and pressed 2 fingers to Elizabeth Carter's neck. She was still breathing. Barely. The most powerful woman in New York was unconscious on the floor of her own boardroom, and the only person who moved to save her was the man whose name she'd never said out loud in a meeting. The man she'd already written down as the person she trusted most. If this story already has, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and stay with me until the very last word. Let's see how far this story travels. Daniel Brooks had been awake since 4:30 in the morning. That wasn't unusual. I was always awake before the sun. He had been that way for 4 years, ever since the morning he woke up in a hospital waiting room, and a doctor sat down across from him and said the words that split his life into 2 halves. Before Rachel. After Rachel. He had learned to live in the after. He had learned to fold his grief into the shape of something useful. Early mornings, packed lunches, homework, check-offs, bedtime routines that Sophie depended on the way a plant depends on water. He had learned that keeping himself busy was the only way to keep himself from falling into a hole he might not climb out of. So he woke up at 4:30. He made coffee. He packed Sophie's lunch. Peanut butter on wheat, no crusts. Apple slices. A small note folded inside the bag that said, "You are the best thing I ever did." He dropped her at his neighbor Mrs. Alvarez's before 6, and he arrived at Carter International before 7. He always arrived before 7. The building was one of those glass towers that made you feel small just by standing next to it. 42 floors of steel and ambition, the kind of place that had its own name printed in silver letters above the entrance, and its own underground parking garage that stayed full until 10 at night. Daniel worked on the 31st floor. Operations manager, a title that sounded important enough to print on a business card, but wasn't important enough for anyone upstairs to actually know your name. I was fine with that. He had never been the kind of man who needed to be known. He showed up. He worked. He fixed what was broken. He left. That was the deal he'd made with himself after Rachel died. Don't need anything. Don't want anything. Just keep Sophie fed, keep the lights on, and keep moving. He had kept that deal for 4 years, until Elizabeth Carter made it impossible. He hadn't meant to get close to her. Honestly, he hadn't even tried. The first time he was ever in the same room as Elizabeth Carter was 8 months earlier on a Tuesday afternoon when the heating unit on the executive floor stopped working, and his supervisor sent him up to check it. He had knocked on the frame of the open office doorway. The woman at the desk didn't look up. Whatever it is, be quiet about it. He had worked quietly. He had fixed the problem in under 20 minutes, a loose connector in the secondary vent panel. Nothing complicated. He was packing up his tools when she finally looked at him. Not at him exactly. At the chair beside the vent. "Is there a problem?" "No, ma'am. All done." She looked at the vent. Back at him. Back at the vent. Then she said, "It was making noise for 3 weeks. I requested a repair 6 days ago. You're the 4th person they've sent. The other 3 must have missed it." Apparently. She was already looking at her screen again. "Close the door on your way out." He closed the door. He thought nothing of it. Except that night Sophie asked him why he looked like he was thinking too hard, and he didn't have a good answer. The second encounter was more accidental. He had been in the break room on the executive floor. He wasn't supposed to use it technically, but the espresso machine on his floor had been broken for 2 weeks, and facilities kept saying they'd order a new part when Elizabeth walked in at 7:15 in the evening. She looked terrible. Not in the way a regular person looks tired. In the way a machine looks when someone has been running it too hard for too long and the bolts are starting to loosen. Her jacket was off. Her collar was open. There were 3 empty coffee cups on the counter she clearly hadn't thrown away. She went to the coffee maker, picked up the pot, and stared at it. It was empty. "I can make a fresh pot," Daniel said. She turned. She hadn't known he was there. He could tell by the way her whole body shifted just slightly. The smallest flinch. The kind of thing a person does when they've spent too many years in rooms full of people who wanted something from them. Who are you? Daniel Brooks. Operations. I fixed your heating unit a few weeks ago. She looked at him, then at the empty coffee pot, then back at him. You know how to use that machine? Yes, ma'am. Then make a pot. He made a pot. He set a cup in front of her. He didn't put anything in it. He didn't know how she took it, and he waited. She picked it up, took one sip, then said without looking at him, "Sit down." He sat. They didn't talk about anything important that night. She asked him what operations actually did not. In the dismissive way some executives asked, like they were asking what language the cleaning staff spoke. She asked like she genuinely didn't know and genuinely wanted to. He told her. She asked how long he'd worked there. He said almost 3 years. She said she didn't recognize him. He said, most people up here don't. She didn't apologize for that. He respected her for it. Then she asked why he was still in the building at 7:15 on a Tuesday. He paused. My daughter has a school play rehearsal tonight. Her friend's mom is bringing her home. I figured I'd stay late and get ahead on tomorrow's work. How old is she? 8. What's the play? Annie. She's playing one of the orphans. She's been singing Tomorrow for 2 weeks straight. He almost smiled. I know every word. Elizabeth said nothing for a moment. Then she said, You came back for the coffee. He looked at her. Excuse me. You came back for this coffee. You fixed my heater, and then you came back to the floor because the espresso machine downstairs is broken. She tilted her head. I noticed you looking at the machine when you left last time. He hadn't thought she'd been paying attention. I'll put in a repair request for the machine tomorrow, he said. I'll have it replaced by Thursday, she said. She did. After that, things shifted in ways that were difficult to explain. Not dramatically, not obviously, just quietly. He started noticing her more, not in a way he was comfortable with at first. Just patterns. The light on in her office when he arrived at 7. The light still on when the cleaning crew came through at 9. The days she skipped lunch entirely. The days she came down to the lobby floor at odd hours and stood near the windows looking at nothing in particular. He started noticing the things that everyone else walked past. One morning, he left a coffee on her desk before she arrived. He didn't leave a note. He didn't know why he did it. But when he passed by the office 2 hours later, the cup was empty and the door was open, which it never was when she was on calls, and he thought maybe that meant something. 3 days later, he left another. Then it became a habit. You've been leaving coffee on my desk. I was in the hallway when she said it. He turned around. She was standing in her doorway, arms crossed, looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not angry, not amused. Something in between. Is that a problem? It depends on the motive. He met her eyes. No motive. You work long hours. Coffee helps. She studied him. You're not asking for anything. No, ma'am. You're not trying to get on my radar. I didn't think I was on your radar. Something moved across her face, just for a second. Then it was gone. You're not, she said. She went back inside and closed the door. He went back to work, but his hands were a little unsteady, and he didn't know why. The note happened by accident. He was dropping off a maintenance report at her assistant's desk when he saw the light under her office door go off, then back on, then off again. He didn't think anything of it. Electrical issue probably in the switch. He went to check. He knocked. No answer. He cracked the door. Elizabeth was sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. She didn't hear him come in. He stood there for a second, long enough to understand he was seeing something she would hate to be seen doing. He quietly closed the door again, went to the assistant's desk, found a piece of notepaper, and wrote 4 words. Get some sleep tonight. He slid it under her door and left. He didn't see her the next day, or the day after. I was starting to wonder if he'd crossed a line when he found a note on his own desk on Thursday morning folded in half, no envelope, no name at the top. He opened it. 5 words. I tried. It didn't work. He read it 3 times. He couldn't explain the feeling that moved through his chest when he read it, but he kept the note. He still had it. 6 months passed. They were not friends. He was clear about that in his own head. She was the CEO of the company. He was operations management. The distance between them was not just professional, it was structural. It was the kind of distance that existed in architecture built into the design of things, not something you crossed by accident. But there were conversations. Real conversations in the break room after 7, when the floor had mostly emptied out and she didn't have to be CEO for a few minutes. Conversations about small things. Sophie's school. A book Elizabeth had been reading on weekends. A renovation project she was considering for the loft she never spent time in. Conversations that lasted longer than either of them planned and ended only when one of them noticed the time. She started asking about Sophie, not in a polite way, in a real way, the way someone asks when they've been paying attention. Did she get the part she wanted? Did she pass the math test she was stressed about? What did you do for her birthday? He answered honestly. He told her about the birthday dinner he'd attempted Sophie's favorite homemade lasagna, which had taken him 2 hours and 3 YouTube tutorials, and had still come out slightly wrong in one corner. He told her about Sophie's face when she tasted it anyway, and said it was the best thing she'd ever eaten. Elizabeth laughed. Not the professional laugh she used in meetings. The real one. He had not heard it before. It did something to him that he spent a long time afterward trying to undo. He noticed the first warning sign in early October. He was on the 31st floor running a systems check when he passed the glass wall of the executive conference room and saw Elizabeth standing at the head of the table. She was speaking. She looked composed, confident, every inch the person her board expected her to be, but her hand resting on the table behind her back, where no one facing her could see her hand, was pressed flat against the surface. The way a person presses a hand down when they need something to hold on to. He stopped walking. He stood there. He watched her for a moment, just long enough to see the slight shift of her weight, the smallest tightening around her eyes. She was in pain. Something was wrong. He moved on. He filed the observation away, somewhere in the back of his mind, where he put things he couldn't act on. 2 weeks later, she came into the break room holding her coffee cup and sat down across from him and said nothing for almost 3 full minutes. "Elizabeth." She looked up. "Are you sleeping?" She put her cup down. "That's a strange question from someone who works for me." "You're not sleeping." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm fine," she said. "I know what fine looks like," he said. "You don't look fine. You look like someone who's been running on no sleep and too much coffee and holding something very heavy for too long." Silence. Then, "Daniel. I'm not asking as your employee. I'm asking as—" He stopped. He wasn't sure what word to put there. "I'm asking because I'm asking." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I had a scare last month." He didn't move. "A medical thing. My doctor said it was minor. Stress-related. He put me on something, told me to slow down." She picked her cup back up. "I'm not good at slowing down." "I know," he said. "I'm handling it." "I know," he said again. She looked at him like she was trying to figure out what he meant by saying the same thing twice. He wasn't sure he could explain it. He just meant, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." He found out about the emergency contact form by accident. He had been covering for someone in HR administration for 2 weeks, a temporary reassignment while their department ran short. It was clerical work, not his usual territory, and he was not technically authorized to see employee records. But the form was on the top of a pending stack. He saw his name before he understood what he was looking at. Elizabeth Carter. Emergency Contact Update Form. Submitted 6 weeks ago. Emergency Contact Daniel Brooks. Relationship to patient. The person who never lets me feel alone. He read it. He read it again. He set it back down exactly where he had found it. He went back to his desk. He sat there for 11 minutes without doing anything. Then he picked up his phone and sent Sophie a text just to have something to do with his hands that said, "I love you, kid. Have a good day." Sophie texted back, "Dad, you just dropped me off." He put his phone down. He thought about Rachel. "I thought about the night in the hospital, The form they'd had him fill out the moment the doctor sat across from him and told him that sometimes there wasn't anything anyone could have done. He thought about Elizabeth pressing her hand flat against the conference room table. He thought about her voice saying, "I'm not good at slowing down." I thought about a woman who ran a billion-dollar company and couldn't sleep and had chosen him, the man from operations, who left coffee on her desk and fixed her heating unit as the person she trusted in an emergency. Not a board member, not a lawyer, not a business partner. Him. And he didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know what to do with any of it. The day of the acquisition meeting, Daniel arrived at 6:45. He had Sophie's lunch packed. He had dropped her off at Mrs. Alvarez's. He had a maintenance report due, and a systems audit to start, and a team briefing at 10 o'clock. He was in the middle of nothing unusual. And then everything changed. He was on the 31st floor running a check on a secondary server room when his radio crackled. "Brooks, executive floor. There's a problem with the AV system in Conference A." He wasn't supposed to be up there. His clearance for executive floor was maintenance-specific scheduled visits only. But the AV tech for that floor was out sick, and the acquisition meeting was starting in 20 minutes, and his supervisor's voice on the radio had that edge that meant, "Don't ask questions." He took the elevator up. He walked through the glass doors. The floor was already buzzing assistants with earpieces, men in suits he didn't recognize carrying leather folders, a catering cart, parked outside the main conference room. This was the biggest day Carter International had seen in 2 years. Everyone knew it. He could feel it in the air the way you feel pressure before a storm. He went straight to the AV panel. He fixed it in 8 minutes. He was closing up the panel when he heard it. Not a crash. Not a scream. Something quieter. A pause in sound. The kind of pause that happens when something goes wrong in a room full of people and everyone stops breathing for half a second before they understand what's happening. He turned. Through the glass wall of Conference A, he could see the board members, the lawyers, the representatives from the acquiring company. 30 people at a long table, all of them in that strange frozen posture. And at the head of the table, Elizabeth Carter. She was standing. She was speaking. And then she wasn't. Her sentence stopped in the middle of a word. Her hand came up, the same hand she pressed flat against tables when she needed something to hold on to, and it reached out for the back of her chair. Missed. She went down in a way that wasn't a fall so much as a collapse, the way a building goes down when the structural support beneath it suddenly isn't there anymore. She went down and nobody moved. Not one person in that room of 30 powerful people moved. Daniel was already running. He hit the conference room door with his shoulder, crossed the distance between the door and the head of the table in 4 steps, and dropped to his knees beside her before the echo of the door hitting the wall had finished. Elizabeth. Her eyes were closed. "Elizabeth, stay with me." He pressed his fingers to her neck. Pulse. There. Faint, but there. He looked up. 30 people standing around him, watching, none of them moving. "Call 911 right now, do it." His voice came out harder than he intended, or maybe exactly as hard as it needed to be, because 2 people suddenly moved at the same time, one toward a phone, one toward the door. He looked back down at her. Her face was pale in a way that sent something cold through the center of his chest. 4 years ago, he had held Rachel's hand in a hospital hallway and promised he'd be right there when she came back. She hadn't come back. "You don't get to do this," he said quietly. "Only for her, only for the 2 of them. You hear me? You don't get to do this." He stayed beside her. He did not move. He didn't care what his title was. He didn't care what her title was. He didn't care what anyone in that room of 30 people was thinking. The only thing that existed in that moment was keeping Elizabeth Carter alive until the paramedics walked through the door, and his own hands pressing gently against her arm, steady and sure, refusing to let go. The ambulance took 11 minutes to arrive. Daniel counted every one of them. He stayed on the floor beside Elizabeth the entire time. He didn't stand up. He didn't move back. When one of the board members, a heavy-set man in a gray suit whose name Daniel didn't know, stepped forward and said, "Perhaps we should give her some space." Daniel looked at him with an expression that made the man take 1 step backward and say nothing else. Space. The woman was unconscious on the floor of her own conference room, and this man was worried about space. Daniel turned back to Elizabeth. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her color was still wrong, too pale, too still. The wrong kind of quiet for a woman who was never quiet. He kept his hand on her wrist, not pressing hard, just present. Just so that if she came back to consciousness in the next 60 seconds, the first thing she felt was another person's hand on hers. He knew what it was like to wake up afraid in a room full of strangers. He wasn't going to let that be her experience. Daniel. Her voice was barely a sound, more like the shape of a word than the word itself. His whole body went still. "I'm here," he said. Her eyes didn't open, but her fingers moved just slightly, just enough to press back against his hand. Then the paramedics came through the door, and everything became noise and motion, and he had to step back. Finally, had to let the people with the equipment and the training take over the space he'd been holding for 11 minutes. He stood up. His knees ached. He hadn't noticed until now. He watched them work, and he didn't look away. One of the paramedics glanced at him. "Are you family?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "I came with her," he said. It wasn't an answer, but the paramedic nodded and moved on, and Daniel stayed where he was, and when they loaded Elizabeth onto the stretcher and wheeled her toward the elevator, he followed without asking permission. Nobody stopped him. Maybe nobody knew whether they were allowed to. Maybe nobody tried. The waiting room at St. Matthew's Medical Center smelled like disinfectant and old coffee, and the particular kind of silence that settles into rooms where people are afraid. Daniel sat in a plastic chair near the window. He had called his supervisor from the ambulance, a short factual call. No dramatics, just "I'm at the hospital with Ms. Carter. I'll be in contact," and then he had put his phone in his pocket and hadn't taken it out again. He had not called anyone else. There was no one else to call. His hands were resting on his knees, and he kept looking at them like they belonged to someone else. They were still steady. He had trained himself into steadiness over the past 4 years. Sophie needed steady, so he had become steady. But underneath the steadiness, something was moving that he couldn't name yet. Fear, maybe. Or something older than fear. A nurse came out of the double doors, looked around the waiting room, and walked toward him. "Are you the man who came in with Ms. Carter?" "Yes." "She's stable. She's conscious. The doctors are still running tests." The nurse hesitated. "Are you family?" That question again. "I work with her," he said. The nurse nodded slowly. "We're going to need someone to complete her intake paperwork. Her assistant gave us her insurance information over the phone, but we need an emergency contact signature." She paused. "Were you listed as her emergency contact?" Daniel felt something shift in his chest. "I don't know," he said, and that was the truth. He had seen the form. He had seen his name on the form. But he had put it back where he found it and walked away and told himself it was an administrative error, a mistake, something he had misread because the alternative was something he was not ready to examine. The nurse held out a clipboard. "Can you take a look? If you're on her file, you'll be authorized to receive updates and sign off on preliminary paperwork." He took the clipboard. He looked at the top sheet. Elizabeth Grace Carter. Date of birth. Primary physician. Insurance provider. And then the emergency contact section, printed in clean administrative font, filled out in Elizabeth's unmistakable handwriting. The kind of handwriting that looked impatient, even in lowercase, like the pen was always moving faster than the paper could keep up. Emergency contact, Daniel Brooks. Relationship to patient. The person who never lets me feel alone. He had not misread it. He sat there looking at those 8 words for a long moment. Long enough that the nurse said, "Sir," in a gentle tone. He looked up. "I'm on the form," he said. His voice came out steady. Nothing else about him was. He signed what they needed him to sign. He answered what they needed him to answer. He sat back down in the plastic chair and he looked at his hands again, and this time he didn't look away. He thought about 6 weeks ago when Elizabeth had submitted this form. 6 weeks ago, she had sat down somewhere, her office maybe, or her home, or wherever she went when she was alone and being honest with herself, and she had written his name. Not her lawyer, not her CFO, not anyone on her board or in her building who had known her for decades. Him. The man who fixed her heating unit and made her coffee and left notes under her door. He thought about what she had written. The person who never lets me feel alone. And it hit him somewhere deeper than he expected, because the truth was, he hadn't been trying to make her feel less alone. He hadn't been running some kind of strategy. He hadn't been angling for anything. He had just been paying attention the way he paid attention to Sophie, the way he paid attention to anything that mattered to him. He hadn't realized it had mattered to her. He hadn't let himself think about whether it mattered to her, because thinking about it meant admitting that she mattered to him, and that was a door he had kept shut for reasons that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the hospital room where he had held Rachel's hand and promised he'd be right there, and then had to drive home alone in the dark. He was not ready to open that door. He wasn't sure he would ever be. But here, he sat in a plastic chair in a hospital waiting room with her name on a form in his hand and his name in her handwriting. And the door was wide open, and he had no idea what to do about it. His phone buzzed. Sophie. Dad. Mrs. Alvarez says you might be late. Are you okay? He stared at the message for a second. 8 years old, and she already worried about him. He didn't know whether to be proud of that or heartbroken by it. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just taking care of something at work. I'll be home for dinner. Promise, promise. He put the phone back in his pocket. He sat. He waited. It was 40 minutes before anyone came out to talk to him. A doctor this time a woman in her 40s. Calm and direct, the kind of doctor who had learned to read rooms and give people exactly the amount of information they needed. Mr. Brooks. He stood up. Ms. Carter is awake and stable. We're running a cardiac workup and some blood panels. She experienced a syncopal episode. That's a sudden loss of consciousness caused by a temporary drop in blood flow to the brain. She paused. In her case, it appears to be stress and exhaustion related. Her blood pressure when she came in was significantly elevated. She's been pushing very hard for a long time. Is she going to be okay? With proper rest and treatment, yes, but Mr. Brooks. The doctor looked at him directly. She needs to slow down. This was her body's way of forcing the issue. If she keeps operating the way she has been, we'll see her here again. And next time, it may not be a syncopal episode. Daniel nodded. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated. She's asking for you, she said finally. That's actually why I came out here. Something moved through his chest. She's asking for me specifically. She woke up, and the first thing she said was your name. He stood very still. Then he said, okay. He had seen Elizabeth Carter in a lot of different modes. He'd seen her run a meeting of 40 people without a single note in front of her. He'd seen her take a phone call on a Monday morning that clearly delivered terrible news and finish the call and walk back into a room full of people without a single crack in her composure. He'd seen her at 7 in the evening when the floor was empty, and she let herself be slightly more human, slightly less constructed, slightly more like a person and less like a title. He had never seen her like this. She was sitting up in the hospital bed, which he could tell had been a fight. She wasn't someone who lay flat and accepted things, but the effort of sitting up had cost her something. Her hair wasn't perfect. Her suit jacket was gone, replaced by a hospital gown. Her hands resting on the blanket in her lap were not pressed flat against anything. They were just her hands. And when he walked through the door, she looked at him, and for 1 second, just one, her face did something he had never seen it do. It let go. You stayed, she said. Yes. You didn't have to do that. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. Not far. Not close enough to be presumptuous. Close enough that she didn't have to speak loudly to be heard. How long was I out? She asked. In the conference room about 8 minutes. I'm not sure exactly. 8 minutes. She said it like she was trying to calculate something. The acquisition meeting. Elizabeth. She stopped. He almost never used her first name in a direct way. He had used it in the conference room because she was unconscious, and first names are what you use when you need someone to come back. But here now like this, he almost never. She looked at him. The meeting can wait, he said. She started to say something. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He just looked at her with a steadiness that had taken 4 years of grief and single parenthood to build, and he said, "The meeting can wait." She closed her mouth. She looked down at her hands. "I hate hospitals," she said quietly. "I know. I don't like people seeing me like this. I know." "Then why are you still looking at me?" "Because you asked for me," he said. "And I'm not going to look away from someone who asked for me." Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that's so full of things that neither person is saying that it almost has weight. Then Elizabeth said, "You saw the form." Not a question. He didn't insult her by pretending otherwise. "Yes." "How long ago?" 6 weeks. She absorbed that. "And you didn't say anything?" "No." "Why not?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I wasn't sure what to say. And because I thought—" He stopped. "I thought maybe I'd misunderstood what it meant." She looked up. "You didn't misunderstand." "I know that now." Another silence, shorter this time. "I filled it out after my appointment in September," she said. "My doctor found something on a scan, a shadow he called it. Probably nothing. Turned out to be nothing. But for about 3 days I didn't know that." She smoothed the blanket across her lap with both hands. A gesture that looked almost like something Sophie did when she was trying to organize her thoughts. "I sat there," Elizabeth continued, "in that office with that form in front of me, and I went through everyone I knew, everyone I trust professionally, everyone who depends on me, everyone I pay, everyone I've known for years." She paused. "And the only person I could put on that line was you." He said nothing. "I know that probably sounds—" "It sounds like the truth," he said. She looked at him. "It sounds exactly like what it is," he said. "And I'm not going to tell you it should have been someone else." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at her hands. "I've never had that," she said quietly. "Someone who just—" She seemed to be reaching for the right word. "Someone who just shows up. No angle, no agenda, no—" She exhaled. "Everyone around me wants something, Daniel. Everyone. That's just the nature of the world I live in. I accepted it a long time ago." "I know. You never wanted anything." "That's not entirely true," he said. She looked at him. He hadn't meant to say that. Or maybe he had. He wasn't sure anymore. "What do you want?" she asked. He thought about it for a long moment. Thought about Sophie. Thought about Rachel. Thought about the door in his chest that had been shut for 4 years and was now standing open in a hospital room with fluorescent lights and a clipboard on the bedside table. "I want you to get some rest," he said. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the truth he could offer right now, and she seemed to understand that because she almost smiled. Not the professional one, the real one, the one that did things to him. He was still not ready to examine, and she leaned back against the pillow. "You're infuriating," she said. "People keep telling me that. I don't believe that. You're probably the least infuriating person in my building." "That's a low bar." She laughed, softly. It cost her something physically. He could see it in the way she shifted, but she laughed. He sat with her. Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside the room in the hallway, the real world was beginning to reassemble itself. Elizabeth's assistant, a sharp, efficient young woman named Claire, who had been with her for 3 years, arrived at the hospital at just past 2 in the afternoon, and the first thing she did was walk to the nurse's station and ask about the paperwork. The nurse told her the emergency contact had already handled it. Claire looked confused. "I'm her primary emergency contact." The nurse checked the screen. "The form on file lists a Daniel Brooks." Claire blinked. "Daniel Brooks. That's correct. From Operations Management." "I don't know his department. He's the name on the form she filed." Claire stood there for a moment processing this. Then she looked down the hallway toward the room where Elizabeth was resting, and the door was slightly ajar, and she could hear very faintly what sounded like conversation. Low and quiet and real. She had worked for Elizabeth Carter for 3 years. She had never heard that particular tone in her boss's voice before. She turned around and sat down in the waiting room to give them more time. At 3:15, a man arrived on the floor. Daniel heard him before he saw him, the particular kind of footstep that announces itself, that carries intention in its rhythm. He looked up from the chair beside Elizabeth's bed. Through the small window in the hospital room door, he caught a glimpse of the man in the hallway. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of suit that cost more than Daniel's monthly salary. Dark hair going silver at the temples. A face that was objectively handsome and somehow still deeply unpleasant. Daniel had never seen him before, but something in his gut shifted. He kept his expression neutral. A nurse's voice in the hallway. "Sir, visiting hours for this patient are..." "I know Elizabeth personally. She'll want to see me." The nurse said something Daniel couldn't make out. Then the man said louder, with the easy authority of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, "Tell her Marcus Webb is here." Elizabeth, who had been half dozing, opened her eyes at the sound of his voice. The change in her was immediate. Not fear exactly, but the walls went up. Daniel watched it happen, watched her face reconstruct itself, watched the exhausted, slightly open woman from 20 minutes ago become something armored and guarded, all in the space of 2 seconds. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was controlled, but her hands resting on the blanket had tightened. "Who is he?" Daniel asked quietly. She looked at him. And in that look, in the brief moment before she answered, he saw something he hadn't expected. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something closer to dread. "Someone from a long time ago," she said. The door opened. Marcus Webb walked in like he had walked into every room of his life, like it was already his. Like the furniture had been arranged for his convenience, like the people inside were props in a scene he was directing. He looked at Elizabeth. He looked at Daniel. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing warm in it. "Elizabeth," he said, "you look terrible." "Marcus." Her voice was flat. "How did you know I was here?" "It's all over the news. CEO of Carter International collapses during billion-dollar acquisition meeting. It's been trending for an hour." He tilted his head. "You should really manage your optics better." He still hadn't acknowledged Daniel's existence. Daniel didn't move. He sat in his chair, his posture easy, his hands resting on his knees, watching Marcus Webb the way you watch something that hasn't made its move yet. "Who are you?" Marcus said, turning to him finally. Not curious, dismissive. "Daniel Brooks," he said. "And you're here because I'm her emergency contact." Something shifted in Marcus Webb's face. It was subtle. If Daniel hadn't been watching carefully, he might have missed it. A flicker of calculation, not surprise, not confusion. Calculation. The kind of expression that happens when someone receives information they weren't expecting and immediately starts figuring out what it means for them. "Emergency contact," Marcus repeated. "That's right." Marcus looked at Elizabeth. "Since when do you have an emergency contact?" he said in a tone that was pretending to be casual and wasn't. "You always said you didn't need one." "People change," Elizabeth said. "Apparently." He glanced at Daniel again. One of those glances designed to make a person feel like they've been measured and found insufficient. "What department are you in?" "Operations." "Operations." The word landed with exactly the amount of contempt Marcus intended. "Well, how democratic." Daniel said nothing. He was not going to give this man the reaction he was looking for. Elizabeth said, "Marcus, I'm tired. Say what you came to say." Marcus turned back to her. His smile shifted, smaller now, more precise. "I came to check on you," he said. "We're old friends. That's what old friends do." "We're not friends. We were more than that once." "Once was a long time ago." Marcus let that sit for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card, a business card, which he set on the bedside table with the deliberate care of someone making a move on a chessboard. "My firm has been watching your acquisition negotiations," he said. "We have some thoughts. When you're feeling better, I'd love to sit down." He paused. "Before things get complicated." It was a threat, dressed in the language of a business offer, delivered in the tone of a courtesy visit. But it was a threat. Daniel heard it. And from the way Elizabeth's jaw set, the way her chin lifted precisely a quarter inch, the way her spine straightened even against the hospital pillow, she heard it too. "I'll have my attorney call your office," she said. "Of course." Marcus picked up the card, reconsidered, left it. "Rest well, Elizabeth." He walked out. The room was very quiet for a moment. Daniel looked at the business card on the bedside table. Then he looked at Elizabeth. Her hands were still tight on the blanket. The color in her face had shifted, not the pale of physical exhaustion anymore, but something else, something harder. "He's not an old friend," Daniel said. It was not a question. She looked at him. "No." "Do you want to tell me who he is?" A long pause. She reached out and turned the business card face down. "Not today," she said. He nodded. "Okay. But Daniel—" She stopped. She looked at the door Marcus Webb had just walked through, then back at him. "Don't trust anything that man says, about me, about the company, about anything." "I wasn't planning to." "I mean it." "Elizabeth." He waited until she looked at him directly. "I know." She held his gaze. Then she exhaled slow, and controlled the kind of exhale that carries something heavy out with it, and she leaned back against the pillow. "You should go home," she said. "You have Sophie." He glanced at his watch. 4:20. "I have a little time." "Daniel. I'm not leaving until I know the doctors have given you a real plan, and not just a pamphlet." She looked at him for a moment. "You are so infuriating, yes, you mentioned." She almost smiled again. Not quite, but almost. And in the space between almost and not quite, in the silence of a hospital room, with a business card lying face down on the bedside table, and the sound of Marcus Webb's footsteps long gone down the hallway, Daniel understood two things with perfect clarity. The first was that Elizabeth Carter was carrying something much heavier than exhaustion, and the second was that whatever Marcus Webb had just walked into this room to start, whatever it was, whatever it cost, Daniel was not going to let her face it alone. Not because of the form, not because of his name in her handwriting, but because she had pressed her fingers back against his hand when she was barely conscious on the floor. And some things, once you feel them, you can't undo. He stayed until 5:30. He talked with the doctor. He read the care instructions. He made sure Elizabeth had Claire's number on speed dial and that Claire had his. Before he left, he stood at the door of her room. She was almost asleep. The medication they'd given her for blood pressure was working, and her body was finally taking the rest. It had been refusing for months. He almost left without saying anything. Then he said quietly, "I'll be at the building at 7. Her eyes didn't open, but she said, "I know." He left. He picked up Sophie from Mrs. Alvarez's at 5:55 and listened to 30 minutes of very detailed updates about everything that had happened at school, including a conflict between Sophie and her best friend Mia that had been resolved by lunchtime and didn't seem to require his input so much as his ears. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He put Sophie to bed. And then he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and thought about Elizabeth Carter in a hospital bed, and Marcus Webb's business card lying face down on a table, and the way she had said "not today," like she was saving something, preserving it for later, waiting until she was strong enough to tell the truth. He thought about the kind of man who walks into a hospital room with a business card and a threat dressed as a visit. I thought about the kind of secret a woman like Elizabeth would keep for long enough that it made her look like that when she heard his voice. He didn't sleep well. He was awake before 4:30, and when he arrived at Carter International at 6:55 the next morning, he stopped at the building directory in the lobby, found the name Marcus Webb in the records of recent visitor sign-ins, because anyone who came to the executive floor had to sign in, even men in expensive suits, and he memorized the company name next to it. Then he went upstairs. He made coffee. He put a cup on Elizabeth's desk, and he waited. Elizabeth came back to work on a Thursday. Daniel knew she would try to come back on Tuesday. He had predicted it with the same quiet certainty he predicted rain before Sophie's soccer games, not from data exactly, but from watching patterns long enough to know how they moved. Elizabeth Carter did not rest well. She rested like someone who had been told to rest, like someone performing the concept of recovery without actually believing in it. He had been right about Tuesday. Claire had called him, and the fact that Claire called him instead of any of the board members said something. Neither of them addressed directly to say that Elizabeth had shown up at 7 in the morning, and the doctor had called, and there had been a conversation that ended with Elizabeth going back home, and Claire looking like she'd survived a small war. Wednesday, she stayed home. Thursday, she was at her desk by 7:15. Daniel heard the elevator open on the executive floor. He was 2 doors down doing a walkthrough on the ventilation system scheduled maintenance. Nothing to do with her, he told himself, and didn't entirely believe it. He heard her heels on the floor. He heard the particular rhythm of her walk that meant she was moving at 80% capacity and trying to sound like 100. He gave her 20 minutes. Then he walked to her office and knocked. "Come in." She was at her desk. Jacket on. Hair perfect. The reconstruction complete. If you didn't know what to look for, you would never know. She had been unconscious on a conference room floor 4 days ago. Daniel knew what to look for. He set a coffee on her desk. She looked at it, then at him. "You heard me come in?" "I heard the elevator." "You were monitoring the elevator." "I was doing ventilation maintenance." She picked up the coffee, took a sip. Her eyes closed for just a second the way they always did with the first sip, the way he'd noticed 3 months in and never mentioned, and then opened again. "Sit down, Daniel." He sat. She set the cup down, folded her hands on the desk, looked at him in the direct way she looked at things she'd already decided to stop avoiding. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That thing where you make it easy for me to say nothing." She held his gaze. "I've been doing that for months, using your decency as permission to keep my mouth shut. I'm done with that." He said nothing. He waited. She drew a slow breath. "Marcus Webb, I need to tell you who he is." "Okay. 12 years ago I was 27. I had just taken over my father's company. It was in bad shape, debt, bad contracts, a board that didn't think a woman in her 20s could run anything more complicated than a lemonade stand." She said it without bitterness, just fact. Marcus came in as a consultant. Financial restructuring. He was good at it. He was good at a lot of things. "You trusted him." "I was engaged to him," she said. Daniel kept his expression neutral. "For 18 months, we were going to get married. He was going to come on as a co-executive and help me rebuild." She paused. What he was actually doing was positioning himself to take controlling interest in the company. He'd been buying up shares through proxies for over a year. By the time I found out, he owned enough of Carter International to call a board vote and remove me. But he didn't. No. Her jaw tightened. Because I found out first. I had 2 weeks. I borrowed money I didn't have, called in every favor anyone had ever owed me, and bought back enough shares to block him. She looked at her hands. He walked away. The engagement ended. The board never knew exactly how close it came. And now he's back. He's been watching the acquisition negotiations. This billion-dollar deal I've been building for 2 years. It represents the largest expansion in the company's history. If it closes, Carter International becomes untouchable. She looked at him directly. Which means if Marcus is ever going to make another move, it has to be now, before the deal closes. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What does he have?" he said. She looked at him sharply. "What?" "He walked into your hospital room with a business card and a threat and you went pale," Daniel said. "Marcus Webb is a man who uses information. So what does he have?" A long pause. "During the 2 weeks when I was fighting to buy back the shares," she said slowly, "I made a deal with a private investor, a man named Hargrove. He provided emergency capital. What I didn't know at the time, what I found out 6 months later, was that some of Hargrove's money came from sources that were not entirely clean." Silence. "I paid him back in full, immediately. I cut every tie. But the paper trail from that transaction exists. And if Marcus finds it, if he takes it to the SEC or leaks it to the press with the right framing, it looks like you knowingly accepted dirty money." Yes. Did you know? She looked at him steadily. No. Then we fight it. She blinked. Daniel, you didn't know. There's a difference between a mistake and a crime, and you didn't commit either one. You were 27 years old, and someone handed you a lifeline that turned out to be compromised, and you cut it as soon as you found out. He leaned forward slightly. That's not a scandal. That's a story about a woman who fixed her own mistake. She stared at him. You're not a lawyer, she said. No. You're not a financial advisor. No. You're the operations manager. Yes. So why are you talking like you're ready to go to war for me? He held her gaze. Because you're not going to do this alone, so you might as well stop planning like you are. Something moved across her face. The wall came up. He could see it had learned to see it, and then something on the other side of the wall pushed back, and for once the wall didn't win. She looked away, out the window, at nothing in particular. He knows about Hargrove, she said quietly. He sent me a message last night, through his attorney. He wants a meeting, and he wants a seat on the board. Or he goes to the SEC. Yes. He's blackmailing you. He's calling it a business proposal. It's blackmail. Yes, she said. It is. The word landed between them like something that had been waiting to be named. Daniel sat with it for a moment. Then he said, When did you get the message? Last night, around 9. What time did you come in this morning? 7:15. So you had approximately 10 hours between receiving a blackmail threat and showing up to work like nothing happened. She tilted her head slightly. Is that impressive or concerning? Both, he said. Mostly concerning. She almost smiled. He didn't. Elizabeth, you cannot handle this the way you handle everything else. You cannot outcompose this man. He's been waiting 12 years. He has a plan. I know that. Then stop performing and start strategizing. She looked at him. You think I'm performing? I think you came into this office in a perfect suit 4 days after collapsing in a conference room because you are terrified of what happens if you let anyone see that you're scared. And I think Marcus Webb is counting on exactly that. He knows you'll try to manage this alone. He's built his whole approach around it. A long silence. You sound like you know him, she said. I know the type, Daniel said. Men who use other people's pride as a weapon. They're not that complicated. She studied him. What do you suggest? Tell your attorney everything, today, not tomorrow today. And I need the name of whoever handled your corporate records during the Hargrove transaction. She went very still. Why? Because if there's a paper trail, there's also context, emails, timestamps, communications that show you didn't know. And if that context exists somewhere in those records, I want to find it before Marcus Webb does. She stared at him for a long moment. Daniel, this is not your problem. You put my name on a form, he said. That made it my problem, and I don't walk away from things that are my problem. She held his gaze. In 12 years of running a company full of brilliant, expensive, high-powered people, in 12 years of boardrooms and attorneys and consultants and advisors, no one had ever said those words to her. Not like that. Not without a bill attached. Her throat moved. His name was Fletcher, she said quietly. Tom Fletcher. He was with the firm we used for corporate record-keeping in the early days. He retired 4 years ago. Do you have contact information? Somewhere. Find it, Daniel said, and call your attorney first. He stood up. He picked up his radio and his maintenance clipboard, the tools of his actual job, the job he was supposed to be doing today and most of tomorrow. Daniel. He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a word for yet. Something between exhausted and open. Something that looked like what a person looks like when they've been holding a door shut for a very long time, and someone has finally offered to help them hold it. Why are you doing this? She said. I thought about the real answer. He thought about the form with his name on it. He thought about her fingers pressing back against his hand. He thought about a door in his chest that had been shut for 4 years, and was now, despite everything he'd told himself, standing open in a way he couldn't close anymore. He gave her the only answer he could stand behind right now. Because you need someone in your corner who doesn't want anything from you. And I happen to be available. He left before she could argue. He was 3 steps down the hallway when he heard her pick up her phone and start dialing. Good. The next 5 days moved fast and sideways in the way that only happens when something is wrong underneath the surface of everything that looks normal. Daniel went to work. He did his job. He ran his team, handled his reports, fixed what needed fixing. He dropped Sophie off, picked Sophie up, made dinner, checked homework, did the bedtime routine. He also spent his lunch breaks in the company's digital archive system. He had access, not broad access, but enough the particular kind of access that operations management gives you, because facilities intersects with records and infrastructure in ways nobody thinks about, and he used it carefully and methodically the way he did everything. He was looking for the Hargrove transaction, not the transaction itself that was legal territory, and he knew enough to stay on the right side of that line. He was looking for something adjacent. Communication logs, internal memos, the administrative residue that any significant business decision leaves behind. Things that would show timing. Things that would show what Elizabeth knew and when. On the 3rd day, he found something. It was a memo internal dated 3 weeks before the Hargrove funds came in from Elizabeth to her then CFO. 12 years old, slightly degraded in the digital archive, but readable. Tom, I need emergency capital within 10 days, or we lose the board vote. I have 3 potential sources. I need you to run full due diligence on all 3 before I commit to anything. I am not taking money from anyone I haven't fully cleared. Make that clear to each of them. EC. He read it twice. Then he printed it. Then he sat at his desk for a moment and thought about a 27-year-old woman fighting to keep the company her father built. Fighting men who didn't believe she could do it, specifically requesting due diligence before she accepted anything. She had asked for verification. Hargrove had passed verification, or appeared to, which meant either the vetting was inadequate or Hargrove had deliberately obscured his sources. Either way, she had tried. Either way, she had not known. He put the memo in an envelope and walked it up to Elizabeth's office at 3 in the afternoon. Claire raised an eyebrow when he walked in. Is she expecting you? She will be, he said. Claire studied him for a moment with the particular expression of someone who was rapidly revising a category they'd put someone in. Then she pressed the intercom. Ms. Carter, Daniel Brooks is here. A 2-second pause. Send him in. Elizabeth read the memo standing up. She didn't sit down. She stood at her desk and read it, and then she read it again, and then she set it on the desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady. She looked up. Where did you find this digital archive? Operations has access to the infrastructure system, which overlaps with records from the building's original document management installation. It's been there for 12 years. My attorney doesn't have this. Your attorney didn't have access to the archive system. I did. She looked at the memo, then at him. Daniel, do you understand what this is? It's your due diligence request, dated 3 weeks before Hargrove's money came in, explicitly stating you would not accept funds from anyone who hadn't been fully cleared. It proves I asked for vetting. It proves you asked for vetting, he confirmed. It doesn't prove the vetting was done correctly, but it proves your intent, and combined with whatever your attorney can establish about Hargrove's concealment of his funding sources. It dismantles Marcus's entire argument, she said. It makes his argument significantly harder to make, Daniel said. Yes. She stared at the memo. Her hand moved toward it, hovered, then pulled back. If I take this to my attorney, she said slowly, and we go on the offensive, if we make clear to Marcus that we have this, and we're prepared to counter whatever he takes to the SEC, he escalates. He might. He will. That's who he is. He doesn't retreat. He finds another angle. She finally looked up. He'll come after other things, other people. A pause. He understood immediately. Me. She held his gaze. He already knows who you are. He knows your name is on my emergency contact form. He knows you were at the hospital. He's not stupid, Daniel. He came to that room not just to threaten me. He came to see who you were. And now he knows. And now he knows you're important to me." She said it plainly, without decoration in the way she said things she had already argued herself past. "Which means he'll use you. If he can find anything in your history, your finances, your life." "Let him look," Daniel said. She blinked. "I'm a 42-year-old operations manager with a dead wife, a daughter, a mortgage I'm current on, and a spotless work record. There's nothing there." He kept his voice even. "I'm not afraid of Marcus Webb looking at my life." "Daniel." "I'm afraid of exactly one thing," he said. She went quiet. He hadn't planned to say it. Or maybe he had been working toward it for 8 months of coffee cups and quiet conversations, and a form with his name in her handwriting, and a hospital room where she asked if he was still there before she asked anything else. "I'm afraid of watching you go through this the same way you go through everything," he said. "Alone. Behind the walls. Performing fine while something eats at you from the inside." He paused. "I've watched you do it for months. I'm not going to watch you do it with this." The room was very quiet. Outside, the city moved. Phones rang somewhere down the hall. The building made its building sounds. Elizabeth stood very still. "You're not just the operations manager," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. "I'm not." She picked up the memo, held it. "I'll call my attorney today." "Good." "And Daniel." She hesitated. Something crossed her face, not the CEO, not the wall, just her. "Thank you. Not just for this. For—" She gestured slightly, a small motion that seemed to be trying to encompass 8 months and a hospital room, and a form and a conversation she'd been avoiding. "For all of it." He nodded. "I'll be downstairs." He left. He was in the elevator when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Brooks." The voice was smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who had never in his life been in a position where he needed to rush. "This is Marcus Webb. I believe we should have a conversation." Daniel said nothing. "I know what you've been doing," Marcus said. "The archive access, the memo. It's resourceful, I'll give you that. But I think you're operating under a misunderstanding about what you're walking into." "I don't think I am," Daniel said. "Elizabeth Carter is a complicated woman. She's been managing the story of her past for a long time. You've seen one document. I have considerably more than one." A pause. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Brooks. I'm simply a man who understands the full picture. Walk away from this, and I have no interest in your life whatsoever. Stay involved and things become complicated for you. For your daughter, potentially." The elevator stopped on Daniel's floor. The doors opened. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, "Don't ever mention my daughter again." His voice was very quiet, very steady. "Mr. Brooks, we're done with this conversation. If you want to talk to me again, go through an attorney." He hung up. He stood in the elevator doorway for a moment. The doors tried to close and bumped against his shoulder and opened again. He thought about Sophie. He thought about Rachel. He thought about the kind of man who threatens a child to control an adult. He stepped out of the elevator. He went back to work. But he called Claire from the stairwell and said calmly and without alarm, "Marcus Webb just called me. He's escalating. Elizabeth needs to know." Claire said, "I'll tell her right now." By evening, the situation had moved. Elizabeth's attorney, a woman named Patricia Voss, who had been in corporate litigation for 30 years and had the energy of someone who ate threats for breakfast, had received the memo, reviewed it, and called Marcus Webb's attorney with what Claire described to Daniel as the legal equivalent of a precision strike. Patricia's message was simple. Carter International had documentation of Ms. Carter's due diligence request, predating the Hargrove transaction. Any action taken against Ms. Carter regarding those funds would be countered with a full investigation into Hargrove's deliberate concealment of funding sources and Marcus Webb's potential prior knowledge of same. Because that was the thing Daniel had been turning over in the back of his mind since Elizabeth told him the story. Marcus had been inside the company during that period, as a consultant, as her fiancé, as someone with access to financial planning and restructuring conversations. He had been in the room when the emergency capital crisis began, which raised a question that hadn't been asked yet. Had Marcus Webb known about Hargrove before Elizabeth did? Had he known what Hargrove was? Had he possibly helped to arrange it, not as a solution? As a trap that had sat dormant for 12 years waiting. Daniel had written it on a piece of paper and given it to Claire to pass to Patricia Voss. Patricia had called back within an hour. She said, "Where did you find this man?" Claire had said, "Operations management." Patricia had said, "Operations management should not be this good." Elizabeth called him at 9:15 that night. Sophie was asleep. Daniel was at the kitchen table with a cup of actual hot coffee. This time, not the cold leftover kind. "Patricia thinks Marcus may have planted the Hargrove connection deliberately," Elizabeth said without preamble. "I know. I'm the one who suggested it." A pause. "You suggested it to Claire." "I didn't want to step on Patricia's territory." Another pause. Longer. "Daniel, if Marcus deliberately set up the Hargrove situation 12 years ago, then he's been waiting 12 years to use it," Daniel said. "Which means this isn't just about the acquisition deal. This is personal. This was always personal." "He wanted the company then," she said. "He wants it now." "He wanted to destroy you then," Daniel said. "The company was the method." Silence on the line. "That's a harder thing to hear," she said quietly. "I know. But you think it's true." "I think a man who walks into a hospital room with a business card 30 minutes after his ex-fiancée collapses on the news is not someone acting on impulse." He paused. He was ready. He'd been ready for a while. She was quiet for a moment. "My attorney wants to meet tomorrow morning," she said. "Before the board. I want you there." He blinked. "Elizabeth, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say you're not an attorney or a board member or an executive. I'm the operations manager. You found the memo. You identified the trap. You've been 3 steps ahead of a man who has been planning this for 12 years. Her voice was steady, clear. The voice she used when she had made a decision and wasn't accepting debate. "I want you in the room." Patricia agrees. He was quiet. "Daniel." "What time?" he said. 7 o'clock. My office. I'll be there at 6:45. She exhaled that controlled exhale he'd come to recognize. "Of course you will." She paused, then quieter. "How's Sophie?" It was such a simple question, such an ordinary human question in the middle of everything that was complicated and high stakes and dangerous. It undid him slightly, not visibly, but slightly. "She's good," he said. "She's sleeping. She made me taste test her science project today. It was supposed to be a lemon battery, but she also made lemon bars from scratch as I'm quoting her, conceptual bonus." Elizabeth laughed. The real one. Brief and unguarded, surprised out of her. "She sounds like she runs circles around you." "Constantly," he said. "I'm completely outmatched." "Good," Elizabeth said. "She'll need that." I wasn't entirely sure what she meant by that. He thought about asking. He let it sit instead, warm and slightly complicated the way some things are better left to breathe. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'm trying." "Try harder." "You're infuriating." "You've mentioned it." She hung up. He sat at the kitchen table. He thought about Marcus Webb and 12-year-old traps and a memo in a digital archive. He thought about Elizabeth's voice, saying she'll need that. Like Sophie's future was something she was already thinking about from the inside. He thought about the door in his chest, about how it had stopped feeling like something he needed to close, about how it had started feeling like something he might actually one day be able to walk through. He finished his coffee. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. But for the first time in 4 years, it wasn't grief keeping him awake. It was something else entirely. Something that scared him more than grief in the way that anything worth having is always a little terrifying. Something that felt against all his careful intentions, remarkably like hope. At 6:40 the next morning, he knocked on Elizabeth's office door. She was already at her desk. The coffee cup he'd left was already half empty. She looked up. He sat down across from her. They looked at each other for a moment. Two people on the same side of something with 20 minutes before the attorney arrived, and a board meeting after that, and a man with 12 years of patience waiting somewhere in the city to make his next move. "Ready," she said. "Yes," he said. And he meant it. He meant it in the way that goes past strategy and past loyalty, and past every careful thing he had told himself for 4 years about what he was allowed to want. He meant it completely. Patricia Voss arrived at 6:58. She walked into Elizabeth's office with a leather briefcase, reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years turning other people's worst moments into winnable arguments. She was 61 years old, small, and had a handshake that made younger attorneys flinch. She looked at Daniel. "You're the one who found the memo." "Yes." "And you identified the potential Hargrove setup." "Yes." She studied him the way people study things they haven't categorized yet. "What's your background before operations management?" "Army. 2 tours. Then logistics consulting for 6 years before I came here." Patricia looked at Elizabeth. "You've had this man filing maintenance reports." Elizabeth's expression didn't change. "Apparently." Patricia sat down, opened her briefcase, and got to work. She spread documents across the conference table in Elizabeth's office, printed emails, financial records, timeline charts her paralegal had built overnight. The Hargrove transaction laid out in full. Every wire, every date, every name attached. "Here's what we know," Patricia said. Hargrove Capital Partners presented itself as a clean private equity firm during the vetting period. The due diligence your CFO ran in 2013 came back clear. What the vetting didn't catch, because it was concealed behind 3 shell companies in Delaware and 1 in the Caymans, was that approximately 40% of Hargrove's active capital at that time originated from sources connected to organized construction fraud in the Northeast. Daniel said, "How long would it take someone to set that up?" Patricia looked at him. "The shell structure properly constructed 6 months minimum, more likely a year. Marcus came into the company as a consultant 14 months before the Hargrove transaction." The room went quiet. Patricia set her pen down. Elizabeth had gone very still. "Say that again," Patricia said. Marcus Webb arrived at Carter International as a financial restructuring consultant 14 months before the Hargrove funds came in. He had access to the company's financial planning, its liquidity position, its board relationships. He would have known within a very narrow margin exactly when the company would reach a crisis point that required emergency capital. Daniel kept his voice level. He would have known the timing. He would have known the amount needed. He would have had more than enough time to construct a funding source that could pass a standard vetting process. Patricia stared at him. Elizabeth said quietly, "He built the trap before he needed to use it. And then he created the conditions that made you fall into it," Daniel said. "Or tried to. He may have had something to do with the board instability in that period. The contracts that went bad. The pressure that forced the emergency capital need." Elizabeth stood up from her chair. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to both of them, and Daniel watched the set of her shoulders, the particular tension that lives between the shoulder blades when someone is processing something that reorders the past. "He was with me," she said. Not loud, almost to herself. "He was in my apartment. He sat across from me at dinner. He told me he loved me." A pause. "And the whole time he was building a cage." Nobody spoke. She turned around. Her face was composed. Completely icily composed. But her eyes were doing something different, something that wasn't grief exactly, but was adjacent to it. The feeling of looking back at a memory and seeing it as something other than what you thought it was. "Can we prove it?" she said. "Patricia, the shell company construction timeline is documentable. If we can establish that the Hargrove structure was built during the window when Marcus had access to Carter International's internal financials." "That's not proof he built it," Elizabeth said. "That's proximity. Proximity plus motive plus access plus a 12-year-old blackmail attempt that only works if you already knew where the body was buried," Daniel said. "It's not a conviction, but it's enough to make a counter-threat that he can't afford to call." Patricia looked at him again with that same recalibrating expression. You're right. A targeted leak to the right financial journalist. Not about Elizabeth, about the shell structure, about the timing. About Marcus Webb's consulting access during that period creates a story he cannot spin. Because if that story runs, the SEC doesn't look at Elizabeth, they look at him. Silence. Elizabeth said, I'm not leaking anything to any journalist. Elizabeth, Patricia started, I'm not doing it that way. Her voice was flat. Final. I'm not going to win this by destroying someone in the press, even someone who deserves it. She looked at Daniel. I want to face him directly. I want him in a room, and I want him to say it out loud. Daniel said, That's not the safest play. I know. He's had 12 years to think about this. You're asking him to improvise. I'm asking him to underestimate me one more time, she said. He's very good at that. He's been doing it since I was 27 years old. Her eyes met Daniel's. I want him in a room. I want him to make his offer. And I want it recorded. Patricia said, That's legally viable, depending on execution. Can you set it up? I can have a consent recording framework in place by this afternoon. Then set it up. Elizabeth looked at her watch. The board meeting is in 40 minutes. I need both of you there. She picked up her jacket, pulled it on. Every motion precise and deliberate, the way someone moves when they have decided something and are done deliberating. She looked at Daniel. Are you ready for a board meeting? He stood. Do I need to be? No, she said. But I want you there anyway. He nodded. They went in. The board meeting was 14 people in a glass-walled room on the 42nd floor. Daniel sat at the far end of the table, away from the seats marked for executives and board members, in the chair that Patricia had quietly indicated was appropriate for a witness and consultant in an ongoing legal matter. He had his hands on the table, and he listened, and he did not speak unless spoken to. What he watched was the room. He had learned in the Army and logistics in 4 years of raising a child who had her mother's ability to read a situation before it fully formed, to watch rooms rather than arguments. To watch what people's bodies did when their mouths were saying something different. The board was not unified. That was the first thing. 3 of the 14 were aligned with Elizabeth. Without question, he could tell by the way they oriented toward her, the way they followed her lead in small physical responses, the way they let her finish sentences before they reacted. 3 were neutral, waiting to see which way things fell. 4 were watchful in the particular way of people who already know more than they're showing. And 2, a man named Caldwell and a woman named Reeves, both of whom sat at the same end of the table and had arrived together, were performing neutrality very carefully over something that looked considerably less neutral underneath. Daniel wrote their names on the notepad in front of him. Then he wrote a single word under each name. Webb. He slid the notepad to Patricia under the table. She glanced at it. Her expression didn't change. She wrote one word back. Confirmed. Elizabeth presented the acquisition update with total control. The deal was still on track. The terms were solid. The timeline was intact. She answered every question cleanly, directly, without the half-second hesitation that signals someone managing information rather than sharing it. Caldwell said, There's a matter I'd like to raise regarding recent events. Elizabeth looked at him. Go ahead. There's been some market concern about the leadership stability of Carter International following. He paused with practiced delicacy. Following your medical episode last week. The room shifted. My medical episode, Elizabeth repeated. A CEO health event of that nature during a sensitive acquisition period. I experienced a syncopal episode caused by exhaustion and elevated blood pressure. I have been cleared by my physician to return to full duties. Her voice was even. If the board is asking whether I am medically fit to lead this company, the answer is yes. My physician's statement is in the board packet your assistant received this morning. Caldwell glanced at Reeves. That glance lasted less than a second. Daniel caught it. Elizabeth caught it. Patricia caught it. There's also been some discussion, Caldwell continued, about bringing in external oversight for the acquisition process. A co-executive structure temporarily to ensure. Who proposed this? Elizabeth said. A beat. It came up in informal discussion. Whose informal discussion? Another beat. Longer. Reeves said, several parties have expressed interest in providing structural support during— Name one of them, Elizabeth said. Silence. Name one party who has expressed this interest through proper board channels, Elizabeth said. With documentation, with a formal proposal, with their name attached to it. She looked down the table. I'll wait. Nobody spoke, Patricia said quietly. Absent a formal proposal submitted through proper governance procedure, this item cannot be actioned at today's meeting. If any board member wishes to raise a formal motion, they are welcome to do so with 72 hours written notice to all parties as required under the company's governance charter. She smiled. I'm sure you all have that date memorized. Caldwell said nothing. Reeves said nothing. Elizabeth moved to the next item on the agenda, like the previous 4 minutes hadn't happened. But Daniel had seen what he needed to see. Marcus Webb had people on the inside. 2 of them, minimum, sitting 14 feet from Elizabeth at her own board table. After the meeting in the corridor, Daniel fell into step beside Claire. Caldwell and Reeves, he said quietly. I know, Claire said. How long? I've had a feeling about Reeves for about 6 months. Caldwell is newer. She glanced sideways at him. I didn't have proof. What kind of access do board members have to acquisition documentation? Significant. They're board members. So if Marcus Webb wanted current deal terms, timelines, the internal valuation reports, he could have had them for months, Claire said. She looked at him. You think he's been inside the deal this whole time? I think he's had eyes on everything Elizabeth has built, Daniel said. And I think the blackmail isn't the primary play. It's pressure. It's meant to make her reactive, make her sloppy, make her do something that damages the acquisition. Claire stopped walking. If the acquisition falls apart, the company's value drops significantly. A depressed valuation is much easier to acquire controlling interest in. He looked at her. He doesn't want a board seat. He wants the company. He always wanted the company. Claire said, I need to tell Patricia. I already did, he said, while you were pulling the governance charter. She stared at him. Then she said, Daniel, what exactly were you doing before operations management? He kept walking. I'll tell you sometime. Marcus Webb accepted the meeting request at 2 in the afternoon. It was set for the following morning 9 o'clock at a neutral conference room in a law office on the 44th floor of a building 3 blocks away. Patricia's territory. Patricia's rules. Elizabeth told Daniel at 4. She called him to her office, closed the door, and sat across from him with the particular stillness of someone who has been running hard all day and has finally allowed herself to be briefly motionless. He said yes, she said. Of course he did. He thinks he's already won. He might be right. She held his gaze. If he has more documentation than we think. He doesn't, Daniel said. If he had more, he wouldn't be negotiating. He'd have already moved. You sound very certain. I've dealt with people who hold leverage, he said. In the army and negotiations in life. When someone truly has you, they don't talk. They act. Marcus has been talking for days, which means what he has is good, but not sufficient. He paused. He needs you to be afraid enough to give him what he wants voluntarily. He needs you to fold. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't fold, she said. I know. I never have. I know that too. She looked down at her desk. At the memo he had found in the archive, now living inside Patricia's briefcase, alongside 14 other documents. At the acquisition file. At the life she had built from a company that was collapsing when she was 27 years old and fighting alone. My father started this company with 11 employees and a lease on a 3-room office, she said. Not to him specifically, to the room, to herself. He told me once that the hardest thing about building something is that every time it gets bigger, there's more for other people to want to take. She paused. He was right. He also gave it to you, Daniel said. She looked up. He could have sold it. He could have handed it to someone else. He gave it to you. Daniel kept his voice steady. He wasn't wrong about that either. Something shifted in her face. The kind of shift that happens deep, where the foundations are not on the surface where things can be controlled. You would have liked him, she said quietly. He was straightforward, didn't have much patience for games. Sounds familiar. She looked at him. He looked back. And then, because it had been building for 8 months, and a hospital room, and a form with his name on it, and 5 days of war, and a board meeting, and a phone call about lemon bars, and Sophie saying she'll need that in his kitchen at 9:15 at night, because all of it had been accumulating in the careful, patient way that things accumulate in a person who has learned to hold on tightly to what matters. He said it. Not the big version. Not the version with declarations and consequences attached. Just the simple, true version. I don't want to lose you, he said. Not from the company. Not from whatever this is. Whatever we've been doing for 8 months that neither of us has named yet. He paused. I lost Rachel, and I survived it because I had to. Because Sophie needed me to. But I am telling you honestly, Elizabeth, I don't want to test whether I can do that again. The room was completely still. Elizabeth didn't move. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had received something they had told themselves not to want, and had discovered in the receiving of it that the wanting had been there all along underneath all the other things. Daniel. You don't have to say anything back, he said. This isn't a demand. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know. She held his gaze. Her throat moved. The first time you left coffee on my desk, she said slowly. I told myself it was an administrative oversight, that someone had delivered the wrong order. A pause. The second time I told myself you were angling for a promotion. Another pause. The third time I stopped telling myself things. He didn't speak. I have been very deliberately not thinking about what this is, she said, because thinking about it meant wanting it, and wanting things I can't control. She stopped. It scares me. More than Marcus Webb, more than the board, more than the SEC. She looked at him steadily. You scare me. I know, he said. You scare me too. She looked at him for a long moment. That's not reassuring. No, he agreed. But it's honest. Something in her face changed. Not the walls coming down, it wasn't that simple, and he knew it wouldn't be. But a door somewhere behind the walls. Opening slightly. After tomorrow, she said. After Marcus. After Marcus, he said. She nodded. He stood, picked up his radio, his clipboard, the tools of the job he still actually had. Get some sleep tonight, he said. You keep saying that. You keep not doing it. She almost smiled. After tomorrow I'll sleep. I'll believe it when I see it. He left. He was in the elevator when his phone buzzed. Not Marcus this time. A number he didn't recognize. Local area code. He answered. Mr. Brooks, a man's voice. Older, slightly nervous. My name is Tom Fletcher. I used to handle corporate records for Carter International. I got a call from a Ms. Patricia Voss this morning. He paused. She said you were looking into the Hargrove transaction. Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. Mr. Fletcher, yes, thank you for calling. I should have said something a long time ago, Fletcher said. I retired because of it, honestly. I couldn't stay. A breath. The vetting report on Hargrove. The one that came back clean in 2013. Yes, I didn't write that report, Fletcher said. The report in the file is not the report I submitted. Someone altered it. After the fact. Between when I filed it and when it was officially entered into the record. A long pause. I submitted a report with significant red flags about Hargrove's capital sources. I recommended against accepting their funds. Daniel stood very still in the elevator. Mr. Fletcher, are you sure? I have my original draft, Fletcher said. I kept a copy. I kept it for 12 years because I didn't know what to do with it, and I was afraid, and I'm still afraid. But Ms. Voss said, he stopped. She said Elizabeth Carter needs to know the truth. The elevator had stopped on Daniel's floor. The doors were open. He didn't move. Mr. Fletcher, he said quietly. I'm going to give you Patricia Voss's direct number. I need you to call her in the next 10 minutes. And I need you to send her a copy of that original report tonight." "Yes," Fletcher said. "Yes, I can do that." "You're doing the right thing." A shaking exhale on the other end. "I should have done it 12 years ago." "You're doing it now," Daniel said. "That matters." He hung up. He stood in the elevator doorway, the doors bumping gently against his shoulder, the way they had once before, in a different hospital, in a different crisis. The original vetting report existed. Fletcher had flagged Hargrove. Someone had altered the document in the official record. Someone with access to Carter International's corporate filing system in 2013. Someone who was inside the company at the time. Someone who needed the Hargrove funds to look clean so that Elizabeth would accept them. So that the trap would close. Marcus Webb had not just arranged the funding source. He had removed the warning that would have stopped her from using it. He had stood next to her as her consultant, as her fiancé, as the man who told her he loved her, and he had dismantled her protection and watched her walk into something he had built specifically to destroy her. Daniel called Patricia. She answered on the first ring. He told her about Fletcher. There was a silence of exactly 3 seconds. Then Patricia Voss. 30 years of corporate litigation, unshockable, unflappable. The woman who ate threats for breakfast said, "Dear God." "I know. This is not blackmail anymore." "No," Daniel said. "This is fraud. Document fraud. Potentially conspiracy to commit securities violations. If Fletcher's original report holds up, Marcus Webb doesn't have leverage over Elizabeth," Daniel said. "Elizabeth has leverage over Marcus." Another silence. "The meeting tomorrow," Patricia said. "Still goes ahead," Daniel said. "Exactly as planned. But now we know what we're walking in with." Patricia said, "He won't see it coming." "No," Daniel said. "He thinks Elizabeth is scared. He thinks she's been scared for 12 years. He thinks that's the only version of her that exists." Patricia said quietly. "He doesn't know her at all." "No," Daniel said. "He doesn't." He finally stepped out of the elevator. Let the doors close behind him. He called Elizabeth. She answered immediately, which meant she hadn't been resting, had probably been sitting at her desk, running contingencies, which was exactly what he'd expected. "Daniel. Tom Fletcher called me," he said. "He has the original Hargrove vetting report, the one that was altered before it was filed." Silence. Not the thinking kind, the absorbing kind. The kind that happens when something you have carried for 12 years. The weight of a mistake, you blamed yourself for the shame of a decision you thought was foolish and trusting and weak suddenly in a single sentence lifts. "He flagged it," she said. "He flagged Hargrove. The recommendation was to decline. Someone altered the report. Someone with access to the filing system in 2013. A long pause. "It wasn't my mistake," she said. Her voice was careful, like she was testing the weight of those words. "Elizabeth, it was never your mistake." Another silence. This one had a different texture. The texture of something being set down after a very long time of being carried. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not broken. Elizabeth Carter did not break. But something in it had changed. Some layer of armor that had been there for so long it had become indistinguishable from her, had shifted slightly, and underneath it was something that sounded like a person who had just been allowed to stop blaming herself. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Tomorrow," Daniel said. 9 o'clock. We walk in with Fletcher's report, the original memo, the Shell Company timeline, and 30 years of Patricia Voss. Marcus Webb walks out with nothing. And if he still tries to push, then Patricia files with the SEC before he gets to the parking garage. A breath. "You've thought about all of this." "I've been thinking about it since the hospital room," he said. "Since I saw his face when he found out I was your emergency contact." "What did you see?" "A man who realized something had changed," Daniel said. "A man who had been counting on you being alone." Quiet. Then, "I'm not alone anymore." It was a simple sentence, factual. But the weight of it, the 12 years of alone that preceded it, the 8 months of coffee cups and notes under doors, and a form with his name in her handwriting made it something considerably larger than simple. "No," he said. "You're not." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Go home, Daniel. Be with Sophie." "I'm going." "And Daniel," she paused. "Thank you. For Fletcher. For the memo. For the board meeting. For all of it." A pause. "For staying." "Always," he said. He meant it in every direction it could possibly be meant. He drove home. Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up when he came in and said, "You look weird, Dad," with the diagnostic precision of an 8-year-old who had been studying her father's face her whole life. "I'm fine," he said. "You look like you do when something good happened, but you're not sure yet." He looked at her. He thought about Elizabeth saying she'll need that. He thought about a door standing open. "Maybe," he said. Sophie considered this. "Is it about work?" "Somewhat." "Is it about your boss?" He set his keys down. "Why would you ask that?" Sophie shrugged with the elaborate casualness of an 8-year-old who had definitely already formed an opinion. "Mrs. Alvarez says you talk about her a lot." He stared at his daughter. "I do not." "You said she didn't eat enough 3 times last week." I was making an observation." "You never talk about other people at work 3 times," Sophie said. "You talk about me 3 times. And now her." He sat down at the table. Sophie looked at him with Rachel's eyes, that direct, unafraid, "I already know the answer" look. "She's nice?" Sophie asked. He thought about it. "She's complicated," he said, "and very capable. And she's going through something hard right now." Sophie thought about this for a moment. "Is she going to be okay?" "Yes," he said. "She is." Sophie nodded slowly. Then she went back to her homework. "Good," she said simply. "Because you worry about her, and when you worry, you burn the pasta." He stared at her. She didn't look up from her homework. He got up and started making dinner. He did not burn the pasta, but it was close. Daniel was awake at 4:15. He didn't fight it. He got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window in the dark, the way he had done every morning for 4 years, and let himself think about the day ahead without pretending he wasn't thinking about it. 9 o'clock. 44th floor. Marcus Webb, walking into a room where he believed he held every card. Daniel had spent enough time in rooms where the other side believed that to know exactly how those rooms felt. He'd been in them in the army, in negotiations, in the particular kind of standoff that happens when someone has decided they've already won and stops watching the edges. That certainty, that bone-deep conviction that you have already won, is the most dangerous thing a person can carry into a room. Not because it makes them stronger, because it makes them stop paying attention. Marcus Webb had stopped paying attention the moment he decided Elizabeth Carter was too afraid to fight. That was his mistake. Daniel drank his coffee. He thought about Tom Fletcher's voice on the phone. "I should have done it 12 years ago." The particular exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a secret, not because he was malicious, but because he was afraid, and had finally gotten tired of the weight. I thought about Elizabeth saying, "It wasn't my mistake," and the way the words had sounded like something clicking into place after a very long time of sitting wrong. He thought about Sophie saying, "You worry about her," with Rachel's eyes, and Rachel's directness, and the complete lack of self-consciousness that comes from being 8 years old and simply saying what is true. He finished his coffee. Heimade, Sophie's lunch. Peanut butter on wheat, no crusts. Apple slices, a note that said, "Today is a good day to be brave." He wasn't sure if that was for Sophie or for himself. Probably both. He dropped her off at 6:15. He was in Patricia's building by 7:30. Patricia was already in the conference room they had booked on the 44th floor. She had documents spread across the table in an arrangement that looked slightly chaotic and was, Daniel had come to understand, actually extremely precise. Patricia organized her materials the way a surgeon organizes instruments, everything within reach in the exact order it would be needed. She looked up when he walked in. Tom Fletcher's report arrived at midnight. "My paralegal has been building the comparison document since 2 in the morning." She slid a folder across the table. The alterations to the filed version are extensive. Whoever modified it knew exactly what they were doing. Daniel opened the folder. 2 documents side by side. Fletcher's original, with its clear flags and recommendation to decline, and the version that had been filed, scrubbed clean, every warning removed. "We can establish the alteration," he said. Document metadata shows the filed version was modified 9 days after Fletcher submitted his original. The modification was made from a device logged into the Carter International Internal Network. She paused. Marcus Webb had network access credentials during his consultancy. "We've confirmed that from the IT records Claire pulled last night." Daniel closed the folder. "Where's Elizabeth?" he said. "She'll be here at 8:30. Patricia looked at him over her reading glasses. "She called me at 6 this morning. I told her to come in at 8:30. A beat. "She called me again at 7, and I told her 8:30 again." He almost smiled. Patricia said, "She's going to be fine in there." "I know. She's been fine in rooms like this her whole career." "I know that too." Patricia studied him for a moment. "You're not worried about her in the room." "No. You're worried about what comes after the room." He met her eyes. He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Patricia nodded slowly. She went back to her documents. "She's had a very particular life," she said, not looking up. "I've known her for 9 years. I've watched men try to get close to her, and I've watched her close doors before they could finish knocking." A pause. "She didn't close the door on you." "I noticed," he said. "Don't waste it," Patricia said simply. I didn't have time to respond, because the door opened, and Elizabeth walked in at 8:22, and Patricia looked at her watch and said, 8:22. And Elizabeth said, "I was in the building at 8:15, the elevator was slow." And Patricia said, "That is not the same as 8:30. And Elizabeth sat down and pulled the folder toward her and said, "Is this Fletcher's comparison?" And they were working. Daniel watched Elizabeth read. He had watched her read documents before she read fast, absorbing in chunks rather than line by line, her eyes moving in a pattern that suggested she was already 3 sentences ahead of where her focus appeared to be. She was excellent at concealing reaction. He had learned over 8 months to watch not her face, but the smaller things, the set of her jaw, the stillness of her hands, the single moment when she would draw a breath slightly slower than the one before. She did that now, reading the comparison document. One slow breath about 2/3 of the way through. He knew exactly what line she was on. The line where Fletcher's original report flagged in plain administrative language that Hargrove Capital Partners had shown significant irregularities in its capital disclosure that warranted further investigation before any funds were accepted. The line that had been deleted from the filed version. The line that, if Elizabeth had seen it 12 years ago, would have stopped everything. She set this document down. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at Patricia. "It's enough." "It's more than enough," Patricia said. "Combined with the shell company timeline and the network access log, we have a coherent case for document fraud with a clear suspect. The SEC investigation, if it comes, investigates him. Not you." Elizabeth nodded. Then she looked at Daniel. She held his gaze. In that look was 12 years of carrying something that wasn't hers to carry. And something else underneath it, something lighter. Something that had been buried under the weight of all that misplaced blame and was only now getting air. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. They didn't need to. Patricia said, "He'll be here in 30 minutes. Let's talk about how this goes." Marcus Webb arrived at 9:03. Not 9. 9:03. 3 minutes late, with the practiced casualness of a man who wants you to understand that your meeting exists on his schedule, not the other way around. He walked in with his attorney, a younger man with an expensive haircut, and the expression of someone who had been briefed thoroughly and was still slightly nervous, which told Daniel the attorney knew more about the actual strength of their position than Marcus did. Marcus looked at the table. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Daniel. And then he looked at Elizabeth. He smiled. "Elizabeth, you look better than the last time I saw you." "I feel better," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "Sit down, Marcus." He sat. His attorney sat. They opened their briefcases. I think we all know why we're here, Marcus said. I'm a reasonable man. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm looking for a resolution that works for everyone. Define resolution, Patricia said. A seat on the board of Carter International, formal advisory capacity on the acquisition, and a modest equity position, let's say 4% in recognition of my historical contribution to the company's survival. He spread his hands, the gesture of a man offering something generous. In exchange, the Hargrove matter stays private. Everyone moves forward. The room was quiet. Elizabeth said, "That's your offer?" "It's a fair one. It's blackmail," she said. "We established that already. I'd like to move on." Marcus's smile tightened slightly. "Elizabeth." "Patricia," Elizabeth said. Patricia opened her folder, slid a document across the table. "This is an independent forensic comparison of two versions of a vetting report submitted in 2013, Patricia said. Version 1 was prepared by Carter International's corporate records manager, Thomas Fletcher, and submitted through standard channels. Version 2 is the version that appears in Carter International's official archive." She paused. "They are not the same document." Marcus's attorney looked at the comparison sheet. His expression shifted. Marcus didn't look at it. He kept looking at Elizabeth. "The modifications to the filed version," Patricia continued, "were made from a device using network credentials assigned to a consultant with active access to Carter International's internal systems during the relevant period." Another pause. "Mr. Webb, your consultancy credentials were active for 19 months during that window." Silence. Marcus said, "That's circumstantial. The metadata on the altered document was preserved in the archive backup system," Patricia said. "It was modified on a Saturday, between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. You were in the building that Saturday. The building's security log shows your badge was used at 10:58. She set another page on the table. "That's not circumstantial." Marcus's attorney said quietly, "Marcus." Marcus said nothing. He was still looking at Elizabeth, and Daniel watched his face do something he hadn't expected. Not panic, not calculation. Something older than either of those. Something that looked for just a moment like the face of a man looking at the thing he had built and understanding for the first time how it appeared from the outside. Then it was gone. The composure returned. The smile came back smaller now and completely empty. "What do you want?" Marcus said. "Withdrawal," Elizabeth said. "Complete and permanent. Your firm terminates all interest in Carter International and the acquisition. You remove your people from my board. Yes, I know about Caldwell and Reeves, and so does my governance committee as of this morning. You sign an NDA covering the Hargrove matter in both directions." She paused. "And you don't come near my company again." Marcus said, "And if I don't?" "Patricia, we file the forensic comparison with the SEC this afternoon. We file a civil suit for document fraud and intentional interference with business operations by end of week. We give Tom Fletcher's original report and his testimony to the financial press." She folded her hands. "Mr. Webb, you have built a considerable career. I suspect you would prefer to keep it." Marcus was quiet. His attorney leaned over and said something very quietly in his ear. Marcus didn't respond for a long moment. He was looking at Elizabeth. "You found Fletcher," he said. "He found us," Elizabeth said. "He kept the original." "He kept the original." A pause. "I underestimated him." "You underestimated a lot of people," Elizabeth said. Something crossed Marcus Webb's face. Not remorse exactly. More like the recognition that comes too late, when the cost of something becomes clear only after it can no longer be changed. He had spent 12 years building a trap for a 27-year-old woman who had refused to stay in it. He had spent 12 years waiting for the right moment to dismantle everything she'd built. And he had walked into this room this morning, certain, genuinely certain, that he had already won. He had not looked at the edges. "You'll have the withdrawal documents by end of day," his attorney said. Marcus stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Elizabeth one final time. She looked back. Steady, composed, not triumphant. Elizabeth Carter had never been a person who performed victory just clear, just herself. He looked at Daniel. And Daniel held his gaze without expression, without heat, with the particular stillness of a man who has nothing to prove and knows it. Marcus left. His attorney followed already on his phone. The door closed. The room was very quiet for a moment. Patricia said, "That's done." Elizabeth said nothing. Daniel watched her. He watched the composed exterior, the perfect posture, the controlled expression, and then he watched it shift very slightly. The way a structure shifts when the pressure it has been built to withstand is suddenly finally removed. Not collapse, just release. The almost imperceptible settling of something that has been held rigid for a very long time. Her hand was on the table. He put his over it. She didn't move. She looked down at his hand over hers. Then she turned her hand over palm up and closed her fingers around his. Patricia gathered her documents with great industry and said she was going to call her paralegal and didn't make eye contact with either of them and left the room. They sat there, Elizabeth's hand in his. 12 years of a false weight. 12 years of carrying a mistake that wasn't a mistake. 12 years of building walls that started as protection and became a way of life. "It's over," Daniel said. "Yes," she said. "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly, the way she did things when she wasn't performing. "Tired," she said. And she seemed to search for the word. Light. Strangely light. Like I've been walking with something in my pockets for so long I forgot it was there and now it's gone. He understood that feeling. He had felt it once. Not when the grief lifted. Grief doesn't lift it, just changes shape, but when he had stopped being angry at himself for surviving Rachel. When he had accepted that keeping going wasn't abandonment. When Sophie had put her hand on his face one morning and said, "Daddy, you're allowed to be okay," in the particular matter-of-fact way of a child who is simply stating what she can see. "What happens now?" Elizabeth said. "You close the acquisition," he said. "You run your company. You sleep before midnight." She looked at him. "That's the professional answer." "Yes." "What's the other answer?" He looked at her hand in his. At 12 years of a lie, undone in 90 minutes in a conference room on the 44th floor. At 8 months of coffee cups and notes under doors, and her voice saying, "You were never just that." At a form with his name in her handwriting. At a door he had stopped trying to close. "The other answer," he said, "is that I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere that isn't a hospital room or a conference room or an office at 7 in the morning. Somewhere that's just a place." He paused. "With you. And me. And nobody needing anything from either of us." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very simple thing," she said. "Yes." "You want to take me to dinner?" "I do. After everything." She gestured slightly. The gesture that tried to encompass Marcus Webb, and 12 years, and a billion-dollar acquisition, and a hospital room, and a form, and all of it. "You want dinner?" "I want to start somewhere real," he said. "Dinner is real." She looked at him. Something in her face was doing the thing it did when the wall and the person behind the wall were temporarily in agreement. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "Normal. Simple. I've been running so hard for so long. I don't know if I remember how to just sit somewhere and eat dinner and not be thinking about 14 other things." "You'll learn," he said. "Sophie and I are very good at dinner. We'll teach you." She blinked. "Sophie. She already knows you exist," he said. "She informed me last night that I talk about you too much." Elizabeth stared at him. She said Mrs. Alvarez noticed too." Something happened in Elizabeth's expression that he had never seen before. Something entirely unguarded and slightly undone. "She's 8 years old, and she pays attention like that." "She's terrifying," he said, in the best possible way. Elizabeth laughed. The real one. The unguarded, unheld, thoroughly genuine laugh that he had heard exactly 4 times in 8 months, and wanted to keep hearing for a very long time. "I don't know anything about 8-year-olds. She'll teach you." "What if she doesn't like me?" He looked at her steadily. "Elizabeth, she already made an assessment based on how I talk about you, determined you're significant, and approved the situation. That's not nothing." She shook her head slowly. "She sounds like someone who should be running a company." Give her 20 years, Daniel said. They sat together in the quiet of the conference room. Outside, the city was moving the ordinary morning motion of a million people doing ordinary things, none of whom knew that in this room, a 12-year-old trap had just been dismantled, and a woman who had spent years carrying the wrong weight had set it down. Friday, Elizabeth said. He looked at her. Dinner, Friday. She held his gaze. Somewhere simple. I know a place, he said. Of course you do. He stood. She stood. They were very close in the way that the space around a conference table sometimes makes people when they're on the same side of it. She looked up at him. Not with the CEO expression. Not with the wall. Just her. Daniel, she said. Yes. I'm glad you followed me to the hospital. You were unconscious, he said. You didn't have a lot of input on the situation. She almost smiled. I'm glad you stayed. I know. I'm glad you left coffee on my desk. I know that too. And the note, under the door. 4 words, he said. You wrote back 5. She remembered. He could see her remembering the small smile that came with it, the particular quality of it, a smile attached to a real moment. It didn't work, she said softly. I was so tired that night, and I opened the note and She stopped. I sat there for a long time after reading it. So did I, he said. When you wrote back. They looked at each other. Friday, she said. Friday, he confirmed. The acquisition closed 3 weeks later. The signing ceremony was on a Tuesday morning, a room full of attorneys and executives and people in expensive clothes. Shaking hands over documents worth more money than most people would see in several lifetimes. Elizabeth stood at the head of the table and signed her name with the same pen her father had used to sign the original incorporation documents 40 years earlier. She had told Daniel that once the pen in the break room at 7 in the evening over bad coffee. One of those details that people share when they forget to keep things back. I was not in the signing room. He was on the 31st floor doing his job. But Claire sent him a message at 10:14 that said simply, "Done. It's done." He sat at his desk for a moment. Then he went back to work. 2 weeks after the acquisition closed, the board voted unanimously to remove Caldwell and Reeves. The governance committee's review of their communications, subpoenaed as part of the broader legal action that Patricia had quietly set in motion, confirmed what Daniel had identified in the board meeting. They had been passing acquisition documentation to Marcus Webb's firm for over 4 months. They resigned before the formal removal vote could be called. Their attorneys were already negotiating. Marcus Webb's firm quietly withdrew from all matters related to Carter International. The withdrawal agreement was signed on a Thursday afternoon. Patricia called Daniel to confirm it. He was at Sophie's school watching her soccer team lose 7-2 in a game. Sophie seemed to find completely acceptable because, as she explained afterward, the other team was really good, and we tried hard, and also I scored once. You scored once, Daniel said. It was a good goal, Sophie said. It was a great goal, he agreed. He drove her home. He made dinner. He did not burn the pasta. Friday came. He picked Elizabeth up at her building at 7. She was waiting in the lobby, not late, not performing, just there in a dark blue coat over something simple. Her hair down in a way he had almost never seen, which made her look like herself in a way that was slightly different from the version he saw in the building every day. She saw him through the glass and walked out. You're early, she said. I said 7. You said 7. That means you plan to arrive at 6:50. He opened the car door. The restaurant is 12 blocks away. I thought we'd walk. She looked at him. You want to walk 12 blocks in November? It's not that cold. It's 40 degrees. I have a coat, he said. You have a coat. We have legs. She looked at him for a moment, with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to argue something she was going to let go of anyway. Then she pulled her coat tighter and said, Fine, we're walking. They walked. It was 41 degrees, and the city was doing what the city does on November evenings, bright and crowded and loud in that particular way that somehow, with the right person beside you, feels like privacy. They talked. Not about the company, Not about Marcus. Not about the acquisition or the board or any of the things that had consumed the last 3 weeks. They talked the way they had talked in the break room at 7 in the evening, about small things, real things, the texture of ordinary life. Elizabeth said her loft renovation had stalled because she kept changing her mind about the kitchen. He said Sophie had decided she wanted to learn guitar because her friend Mia's older sister played guitar, and it looked cool. Elizabeth said, "Does she have any musical background?" "None. She's very confident anyway." "That tracks," Elizabeth said. He looked at her sideways. "You've never met her." "I've learned a lot about her in 8 months." He thought about that. About Elizabeth sitting in his building every day, hearing stories about Sophie in small doses, the lemon bars, the birthday lasagna, the soccer game, the guitar aspiration, and building a picture from them. The same way he had built a picture of her from coffee cups and notes and break room conversations, and a form with his name in her handwriting. They knew each other, he realized. Not in the way you know someone you've shared a dinner table with for years. In a different way, the way that builds from the edges inward, from the details, from attention, paid over time. He liked the way they knew each other. The restaurant was small and Italian, and not the kind of place that required reservations 6 weeks in advance, which Elizabeth pointed out was a deliberate choice, and he confirmed that it was. "You chose somewhere where people don't recognize me," she said. "I chose somewhere I like," he said. "That's a bonus." She looked at the menu. "What's good?" "Everything. Get the carbonara." She got the carbonara. He got the same. They ate. They talked. The food was good. The table was small enough that conversation was easy. Outside the windows, the city moved in its relentless way, and neither of them paid it much attention. Elizabeth said, "Tell me about Rachel." He looked up. She held his gaze steadily. "You don't have to, but I'd like to know, if you want to tell me." He set his fork down. He thought about Rachel, about how she had laughed, which was loudly and without caring who heard, about how she had argued, which was fiercely and usually correctly, about how she had loved Sophie from the moment she knew Sophie was coming, with an intensity that had sometimes made him feel like he was watching something too private to look at directly, about the hospital, about the doctor, about driving home in the dark. "She was a teacher," he said. 4th grade. She loved it more than any job I've ever seen anyone love anything." He paused. "She was 36 when she died. Aneurysm. No warning. One morning she was there, and by the evening she wasn't." Elizabeth said nothing. She listened. "Sophie was 4, he said. "She doesn't have many real memories. She has the ones I've given her, stories, photos, the things Rachel said about her, that I've told her enough times that they're almost like her own memories now." He paused. "I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not. I just didn't want Sophie to grow up not knowing who her mother was." Elizabeth said, "It's the right thing." He looked at her. "My mother died when I was 11, she said. "My father never talked about her. I think it hurt too much, and he thought protecting me from the hurt meant not talking." She held his gaze. "I would have given anything for stories, even second-hand ones." She paused. "Sophie is lucky." He absorbed that. "I'm sorry," he said. "About your mother." "I'm sorry about Rachel." They sat with that for a moment, the mutual recognition of loss, the particular understanding that exists between people who have carried grief and kept moving. Not competition, not comparison, just recognition. "Sophie wants to meet you," he said. Elizabeth looked up. "You told her about tonight." "She asked where I was going. She has my face memorized." He paused. "She said, and I'm quoting, 'Is it the lady from work?' I said yes. She said, 'Tell her I want to show her my goal.'" Elizabeth blinked. "Her soccer goal." "I told her you weren't at the game. She said that's what video is for." A slow smile, the real one. "She has video of the goal. She made Mrs. Alvarez record it on her phone. She has watched it at least 14 times. Elizabeth laughed. It filled the small restaurant in a way that made 2 people at the next table look over and smile for no reason they could have explained. "She sounds absolutely wonderful." "She is," he said. "She's the best thing I ever did." "That note you put in her lunch," Elizabeth said. He looked at her. "You told me about it once. You are the best thing I ever did. You write it almost every day." He had mentioned it once months ago in passing. She had held on to it. "Yes," he said. "She knows that," Elizabeth said quietly. "She's going to know that her whole life, that her father—" She stopped. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. "That's the most important thing a person can know, that they are someone's best thing." The word best hung in the air between them with more weight than its 4 letters should be able to carry. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I know what you mean to me," he said. "I've known for a while. I've been careful about saying it because," he paused, "because the last time I loved someone I lost her. And I spent 4 years building a life around not being that exposed again." Elizabeth held very still. "And then you put my name on a form," he said. "And I found it, and I put it back, and told myself I'd misread it. And then you were unconscious on a conference room floor, and I caught you, and you pressed your fingers back against my hand, when you could barely feel anything, and I stopped being able to tell myself I'd misread it." She said nothing. "I love you," he said. "That's the simple version. There's a longer version with more context and more patience and more time, and I want all of that too. But the simple version is I love you, and I'm not afraid of it anymore." Elizabeth Carter had negotiated billion-dollar deals. She had faced down a hostile board and a blackmailer with 12 years of patience, and walked into rooms that would have made most people leave the profession. She had built a company from the ruins of one that was failing, and had done it alone without allowing herself to want anything that could be used against her. She had not cried in a professional context in 11 years. She didn't cry now, but her eyes did something. Something that was adjacent to tears, without being them. The thing that happens when emotion arrives faster than the body's ability to process it, and you hold it back, not because you're ashamed of it, but because you're still getting used to the fact that you're allowed to feel it at all. "I wrote your name on that form," she said quietly. "Because when I sat there in that doctor's office and I thought about what could happen, I didn't think about the company. I didn't think about the acquisition, or the board, or what would happen to everything I'd built." She paused. "I thought about you. I thought if something happens, I want Daniel to know. I want Daniel to be there." She met his eyes. "I didn't understand what that meant when I wrote it, or I understood it and wasn't ready to say it yet." A pause. "I'm ready now." He reached across the table. She took his hand. Outside, the city moved. November cold pressed against the restaurant windows. Somewhere in New York, Marcus Webb was having a very different kind of evening, and Carter International's acquisition documents were sitting in a file waiting for morning, and Sophie was at Mrs. Alvarez's watching her soccer goal for the 15th time. Here in a small Italian restaurant, 12 blocks from a glass tower, 2 people sat across from each other with their hands together, and the particular kind of quiet that isn't empty. The kind that's full of everything that has already been said, and everything that is still coming, and the understanding that both of those things are all right. "Saturday," Elizabeth said. He looked at her. "Sophie's goal. I'd like to see it." A pause. "And if she wants to show me in person what a good goal looks like, I'd like that too." He looked at her for a long moment. "I thought about everything it had taken to get to this table. Rachel, and 4 years, and a form in a filing stack, and a woman unconscious on a conference room floor, and 11 minutes counting seconds, and a memo in a digital archive, and Tom Fletcher's shaking voice, and a boardroom, and Marcus Webb's face understanding too late." He thought about Sophie's note. "Today is a good day to be brave." "Saturday," he said. 2 months later on a Sunday afternoon that smelled like cold air and garlic bread. Sophie Brooks sat at the kitchen table doing homework. She was doing badly on purpose, because she was more interested in watching Elizabeth try to dice an onion than in the actual homework. Elizabeth was not good at dicing onions. This had become established fact in the 3 visits she had made to their apartment since the Italian restaurant, each one slightly longer than the last, each one slightly more ordinary, which was exactly how Daniel had hoped it would go. "You're going to cut yourself," Sophie said. I'm not going to cut myself, Elizabeth said. Dad, she's going to cut herself. Daniel from where he was across the kitchen doing the actual cooking part. Elizabeth, the grip is. I know the grip. Your knuckles should be. Daniel, I run a multinational corporation. The onion doesn't, he said. Sophie dissolved into laughter. Elizabeth pointed the knife at her and said, do not. And Sophie laughed harder, and Elizabeth looked at Daniel with an expression of theatrical suffering that shifted when Sophie wasn't looking into something so different, so unguarded and warm, that he had to look back at what he was cooking to recover himself. Sophie said from behind her. Laughter. Are you staying for dinner? Elizabeth looked at her. Sophie was 8 years old with Rachel's eyes and Daniel's stubbornness, and a completely original way of inhabiting the world. And she was asking the question with the simplicity of someone who already knew the answer and just needed it said out loud. Yes, Elizabeth said. I'm staying for dinner. Sophie nodded like this was filed and settled. Good. He makes too much food. I know, Elizabeth said. He's been doing that for months. Sophie looked up from her homework. He does it because he's hoping someone will stay. The kitchen went quiet. Daniel did not turn around. Sophie went back to her homework satisfied, as though she had simply stated a fact that everyone in the room should have already known. Elizabeth looked at Daniel's back for a moment. At the steadiness of him, the particular steadiness he had built from grief and love, and 4 years of mornings before the sun, from left coffee cups and notes under doors, and a form that had his name in someone's handwriting, from running toward a glass wall when 30 people stood frozen. She set down the knife. She walked to where he was standing. She touched his arm. Just her hand on his arm. Just that. Just presence. And he turned, and she looked at him in the way she had looked at him across the conference table that morning, that felt like a long time ago, when he had said ready, and she had said yes. He's right, you know, she said quietly. You do make too much food. It's a habit, he said. I know, she said. I like it. He looked at her. She looked back, behind them. Sophie had abandoned the homework entirely and was describing her soccer goal in real time to no one in particular, providing her own commentary, completely self-sufficient as Daniel's daughter, as their girl. Maybe someday, if all of it kept going the way it was going tended to be. He had loved once and lost her and kept going. He had built a life in the shape of grief and refused to let it be only that. And the most unexpected thing. The thing he could not have planned, could not have anticipated, would not have believed if someone had described it to him 4 years ago in a hospital waiting room, was that love, actual love, the kind that arrives when you are not looking for it, when you have stopped believing you deserve it, when you have told yourself for years that the door is closed and must stay closed. That kind of love does not knock twice. It leaves coffee on your desk. It writes your name in its handwriting and calls you the person who never let it feel alone. It catches you when you fall, stays when everyone else leaves, finds the truth in a 12-year-old archive, and shows up at 9 o'clock with 30 years of legal firepower and an unwillingness to let you carry anything alone anymore. It says Friday and means forever, and it stays for